Immediately claiming central space opens diverse attacking avenues and sets a dynamic tone. This Sicilian defense instantly injects asymmetry, creating unbalanced pawn structures and promising dynamic counterplay for black on the queen side. Quickly seizing central space, this knight prepares for further expansion and to support a pawn advance, aiming to dominate the board's core. Solidifying central control, 2. d6 prepares for queenside development and hints at a robust pawn structure, aiming to outmaneuver white's dynamic piece play. Challenging the center's pawn structure immediately, white demands black decide how to resolve the emerging tension. Opening the central files now balances immediate pawn equality with potential piece activity for both sides. Opening the central file grants swift piece activity, challenging black to harmonize their developing forces. Instantly challenging the central knight, this develops a piece while preparing castling, injecting immediate dynamism into the Sicilian defense. Establishing a central pawn presence is crucial, but be mindful of potential knight forks targeting your king. Preparing to advance the queenside pawns is a common idea in this Sicilian setup. Developing this bishop to g5 immediately pressures black's knight, potentially disrupting its key defensive duties and creating immediate tactical avenues for white to exploit. Solidifying the pawn structure and preparing for development, this pawn advance elegantly prevents the immediate pressure of the bishop on g5, opting for a more controlled game rather than an immediate pawn capture. It signals a commitment to a potentially slower, positional struggle where piece maneuvering will be key. Unleashing the king's pawn creates immediate central confrontation and aims to seize a significant space advantage, but simultaneously exposes white's own king to potential tactical skirmishes down the newly opened diagonal. Establishing piece harmony, black logically develops their bishop, aiming to castle kingside soon and prepare for potential central pawn pushes, while also avoiding any immediate weaknesses on the dark squares. Consolidating development by bringing the bishop to an active square, this move prepares to castle kingside and avoids immediate confrontation with black's potentially doubled pawns. It also opens a clear path for the queen to join the fray on the kingside. Challenging white's centralized knight with queen pressure on b3, this maneuver initiates a strategic duel for control of the d4 square and potentially creates dynamic complications down the b-file. Positioning the queen aggressively, 9. qd2 eyes the queenside and reinforces the knight on d4, simultaneously preparing for castling kingside, which will bring the rook into play and solidify white's central control. This move subtly probes for weaknesses in black's queenside pawn structure while maintaining flexibility for white's next steps in this sharp Sicilian. Snatching the b-pawn creates immediate tactical fireworks, disrupting white's queenside structure and potentially opening lines. However, this aggressive grab often leaves black's king exposed and the queen far from the center, inviting white to launch a potent kingside attack or exploit the newly created weaknesses. Careful calculation is paramount to survive the ensuing complications. Asserting pressure on the queen side, white immediately challenges black's queen and aims to exploit the exposed position of the b2 pawn, forcing black into immediate defensive considerations rather than allowing them to solidify their queenside structure. Disrupting white's rook pressure, this aggressive queen sortie invites immediate confrontation and risks overextension. It's a bold attempt to seize the initiative on the queen side, but leaves the king somewhat exposed and demands precise follow-up to justify the positional gamble. Castle secures the monarch, preparing to connect the rooks and activate them on open files, while also clearing the way for the queen to potentially engage in more central play or defend its new queenside outpost. Instead of blindly retreating, black reinforces their central presence and prepares for further development, a logical step to consolidate after the king's side castling by white. A daring thrust, 12. f5 throws open lines on the kingside and challenges the pawn chain, potentially sacrificing space for initiative. A bold sortie. Black boldly thrusts the knight towards the king's territory, eyeing the potential discovery that arises if white's rook vacates the third rank and creating a fascinating tactical nexus around the d3 square, which could soon become a battleground for control. The monarch seeks sanctuary behind a protective pawn wall, acknowledging the increasing pressure on the kingside from black's bishop and knight coordination, while simultaneously preparing for potential pawn breaks or a repositioning of the rook to a more active file. A long overdue step, the castling of black's monarch finally tucks it away behind a newly formed pawn barrier, addressing the lurking danger on the kingside after white's aggressive pawn thrust. An interesting repositioning. That rook hops to b3, not to seize an immediate open file, but to gain a bit of breathing room and perhaps prepare a future advance on the queenside, or even to support a central pawn push later. It subtly shifts the pressure, turning the focus away from the now contested d4 square and creating potential attacking angles along the third rank should the queenside open up. This is less about direct confrontation and more about building a flexible, multifaceted threat, a patient accumulation of options rather than a decisive blow. The knight's repositioning to c5 introduces a dynamic pressure point on white's queenside, simultaneously preparing to support a central pawn push, or even considering a dive into b3 if white's defenses weaken. Sacrificing the bishop on f6 clears the g-file for your rook and opens up attacking possibilities against black's castled king, aiming to exploit the lingering weaknesses around the e7 and f7 squares. The bishop now gains a more active diagonal, eyeing the kingside and preparing to support potential pawn pushes or piece exchanges, though it momentarily sacrifices the initiative in clearing the pawn chain. The knight's daring leap to the edge of the board injects a fascinating dynamic, aiming to disrupt black's burgeoning queenside activity and potentially isolate the advanced pawn on a3. White sacrifices immediate central influence for a chance to create imbalances and exploit the slightly misplaced black queen. This maneuver signals a shift towards a more aggressive, perhaps even speculative, approach, seeking to exploit any temporary weaknesses in black's pawn structure or piece coordination. The knight's new square offers a different perspective, looking to control key diagonals and potentially support an eventual pawn storm on the kingside or a rapid central thrust. Asserting influence on the queenside, this knight aims to disrupt white's pawn structure and exploit the now weakened c4 square, potentially preparing for a deeper penetration or a favorable exchange that eases black's queenside pressure. Chasing the queen further, white aims to disrupt black's nascent queenside coordination by probing the weak squares around the knight and potentially creating opportunities on the weakened d-file. Releasing the pawn on d4 abandons central control, creating potential targets for your opponent's pieces to exploit the weakened d-file and pressure your king's defenses. Reclaiming that pawn with the rook immediately injects a crucial element of active defense, preventing black from consolidating their material advantage and forcing them to react to white's renewed aggression. Unpinning the knight opens lines of communication for your pieces, potentially transforming this into a wild skirmish where tactical alertness is paramount. Unveiling a surprising threat to the black king, this aggressive thrust aims to exploit the weakened dark squares and force concessions. The key idea is to create a mating net, using the queen and potentially other pieces to hunt down the enemy monarch now that the pawn shield is fractured. Notice how the queen's placement on g4 not only attacks the f6 bishop, but also eyes the g7 pawn, a potential entry point for white's attacking forces. This creates immediate tactical problems for black, forcing them to find defensive solutions rather than continuing their strategic maneuvering. It's a sharp, double-edged decision that injects significant tension into the position, demanding precise calculation from both sides. This move fundamentally alters the game's dynamic from positional skirmishing to an open assault, capitalizing on black's slightly awkward queen placement earlier. Exploiting the compromised queenside pawn structure, black sacrifices material to dismantle white's attacking setup, prioritizing piece activity and open lines over material equality. Recapturing the pawn opens a critical diagonal for your queen, creating immediate pressure on black's kingside while simultaneously clearing the e-file for further piece activity. Unleashing a knight to the heart of white's position, black aims to disrupt white's already precarious pawn structure and potentially expose the king's safety through a sudden tactical onslaught.